So I'm gonna try, so I play around with the titles of my talks a lot, and so maybe I'm a little too old for the crowd, but I decided I wanted to make a Field of Dreams reference because I'm a big baseball fan. And what I really want to do is give people a sense of why cosmology is exciting rather than focus on the very specific details of exactly the thing that I do. But I do want to encourage people, if I say anything that catches your interest, feel free to come talk to me afterwards, or even send me an email if you would like to. So first of all, what do I mean by cosmology? So I think of cosmology as storytelling. I think that humans are natural storytellers, and so what we really like to do is figure out sequences of events, and I think that whether you're a novelist or you're a theoretical physicist or you're a condensed matter experimentalist, what you're doing is creating stories. And so in particular, I think that the best story in the universe, and I am biased, this is an okay bias to have, is the cosmological story. And so what you're looking at here is a timeline from what we might call the Big Bang, and I say might because there's now a lot of debate about whether we live in an eternally inflating universe. So what we might call the Big Bang all the way up until about here. So this is obviously not to scale. And so along the way, the questions that we are asking are things like, how did particles come into existence? How did space-time come into existence? What is the dynamic between particles and space-time? I would say if you could pick one thing that Perimeter Institute does, it's think about what's the dynamic between particles and space-time. And then how do we get from whatever weird particle soup thing to this room today? To me, that's all cosmology. I don't really see the same distinctions of discipline that other people do. So to put this in very basic terms, what are a few things we think we know about the universe? And I'm going to hedge and say we think we know because our paradigms are always ready to be blown up by someone who has a better one, right? And so this is, for example, what Einstein did. So we think that we know that we live in an expanding universe, and so that's one of the reasons that the previous slide is not to scale. And when we say expanding universe, so probably all of you have heard some kind of like race car analogy that galaxies are racing away from each other. So I actually think this is not a great analogy, and we have a much better one, because actually what's happening is way cooler than that. So if you imagine a balloon, and you think about putting little magic dots on the balloon so it hasn't been blown up or anything. And then you blow up the balloon and the dots all stay the same size. But the balloon keeps getting bigger, so the space between the dots is larger. That's really what's happening. It's not so much that galaxies are flying away from each other, but rather that the space-time between galaxies is continuously growing. So we live in this extraordinary universe where space-time continues to grow between these objects that we live in. So a couple of other things that we think we know about the universe, and this is kind of known as the cosmological principle, is that we live in a homogeneous and an isotropic universe. So what homogeny really means is that you can go anywhere in the universe and it will essentially look basically the same. So obviously we're in this room, it's pretty diverse. So that's not true to all scales, but it's true in what we would call cosmological scales. And isotropy means that you can stand in any spot in the universe, and no matter what direction you look in, things will look about the same. So these are kind of the operating principles and frameworks that we work in in cosmology. But of course, the question is, how did the universe get this way? It's one thing to say it is this way, but in physics, we're always interested in why. And in particular, how do you get such a large universe to look the same no matter where you stand, and to look the same in all directions? So just to talk about one thing that I have worked on, so we have something called inflation. So I like this slide in particular for kind of a dorky reason, but I think it's particularly important for the students. I hated freshman physics, like super, super, super hated it. And if I didn't already want to be a cosmologist, totally would have dropped out of the physics major, like big time, because I hated freshman physics. And what I really wish someone had told me is that when you think about things rolling down on inclines and you're plotting your potentials and all of the things that seem really like like, how is this relevant to my life or anything cool in physics, that actually you're going to spend the rest of your career pushing things down potentials. And so actually the reason freshman physics is really important is because it really lays the conceptual foundation. So I just want to plug that for anybody who was thinking, like, God, mechanics really sucked. I agree. I'm also now a PhD holder in physics, so it's worth sticking it out. So the idea behind inflation is that we have an era of rapid expansion driven by a particle that we creatively call the inflaton. We're not that creative sometimes. And after inflation ends, this inflaton oscillates in its potential. And so what you can think about is that you can really think of this particle as kind of like a ball rolling down an incline, right? And the potential energy is changing, the kinetic energy is changing. And that this causes the universe to expand very rapidly. And this rapid expansion allows the universe to become homogeneous and isotropic. So this is the general picture that we think we have. And then after inflation ends, we often don't talk about this, and I realized I had my PhD and had never thought about what happens to the inflaton after the end of inflation, right? So I just want to point out that if you've never asked this question, I had a PhD and neither had I. So I've since started working on an era called reheating, where you think about what is the particle production afterwards? What happens to this ball rolling down an incline? Does it just stop when it gets to the bottom? Is there an incline on the other side? Is it rolling back and forth? And what does that mean for the structure of the universe? So another way I like to reframe the question and the idea of working on a storyline in physics, another version of that first slide that I showed you about cosmology is this timeline. So you have time running forward here in seconds, you have temperature going up here, and you have energy going up here. And so essentially what you're looking at is the thermal, one way of thinking about cosmology is that we're trying to fill in the thermal history of the universe. And so you can imagine the universe might start very, very hot because things are very condensed and whatever your favorite Big Bang analogy is. And then you think about space-time expanding very, very rapidly, and you imagine it must cool down, right? And so this is the era of inflation that I was just talking about. But we know from observational data that in order for Big Bang nucleosynthesis and early hydrogen formation to occur, that the temperature actually has to be warmer than what you might expect at the end of inflation. And so this is the era of reheating. And I have, for the last couple of years, been working on the era of preheating, which is a very early time period where energy is transferred from the inflaton to other particle fields. So I like to highlight this because preheating is a problem that's basically completely unsolved. Reheating is completely unsolved. We don't know how to calculate how you get from here to here. So this is an open question that I hope some of the students in the room will consider working on. So what is another way to think about this cosmological storytelling that we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish? Well, this is the Planck map. So this might look familiar to a lot of people because it's pretty much ubiquitous in PR for cosmology, astronomy, and physics. So this is a map of the universe when it was about 380,000 years old. So this is like, I don't know, the universe is like learning to walk and maybe still puking on you when you burp it. And so you notice that there's some blue, there's some orange. Don't let the color differentials fool you. So basically, this map is isotropic, it's homogeneous. The differences in color are 1 part in 10 to the 5. These are very small differences, and we're looking at temperature. So these are small, 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 very small variations in temperature. But these variations in temperature are also where we begin. These are the seeds of structure formation in the universe. So I said earlier that you could think about your question being, what is the thermal history of the universe? But you can also think that your question is, what are the seeds of structure formation, and how does that get to us? But where do we begin? So I have spent my entire career being kind of a fence sitter between astronomy and physics. So in fact, I started a PhD in astronomy at UC Santa Cruz and then was lured away by Lee Smolin to come to the Perimeter Institute to move to do theoretical physics. And I have to say, like, I went to him because I wanted to be lured away. So that's not entirely on him. But what I have found interesting, continuously living in that world between physics and astronomy, is how astronomers and physicists can ask the same questions, but in completely different ways. And that provides an exciting, but also sometimes extraordinarily frustrating challenge for cosmologists. So this map is really like, astronomers wonder, okay, how do I make this map? How do I interpret this map? So those of us who work in theoretical physics and in particle physics think about that map completely differently. So this is the theoretical physics version of this map, which is to ask, where do particles come from? Because that's really what we're trying to understand. So again, I mentioned that one of the driving questions at PI is, are they inextricably tied to space-time at the quantum gravitational level? And this is something that I thought about quite a bit as a PhD student. So we also think about things that you might have heard about fields. So I just kind of wanted to mention, if I slip and say field instead of particle, what do I mean by that? So what I mean is there are quantum fields, they're everywhere. And when they get excited, you can think of a particle as an excitation of one of these fields. So another way of asking that question of where do these thermal variations come from, where did these seeds of structure formation come from, is to ask, how did fields get so excited that it led to structure formation, that it eventually produces stars and galaxies, and stars which have solar systems, and solar systems with planets that are right in the correct zone for water formation and carbon life to arise. So again, for me, this is still a question of how do you make this room, even though I'm mostly interested in the very, very early stages of that process. So another way of asking this question is to just say, what is the universe made of, right? And I think that this is, maybe the more popular science version that we're used to hearing. So let me start by talking about this slide by telling a story. So the summer after my freshman year of college, this was back in 2000, I went to see a talk by the esteemed cosmologist Rocky Kolb while I was doing research at the University of Chicago and at Fermilab. And Rocky said, we live in a very exciting time for cosmology because we have basically figured out what the universe is made of. We know that it's about 3/4 dark energy, we know it's about 1/4 dark matter, and it's only a smidgen everyday stuff like us. So he said this is very, very exciting. We're basically done. We just have to figure out what dark energy is and dark matter is, and we'll be done. Right, so I tell you guys the timeline. This was in 2000, right? So thank God he was totally wrong about this being an easy problem, because otherwise I wouldn't have things to work on, right? So I still work on this question of what is the dark matter. And I have to say, in the 17 years since Rocky gave that talk, we've basically made 0 truly significant progress on figuring out what these two things are. And so I don't think that makes us failures as physicists. I think that just means physics is hard and the time scale is long, and that this is one of the reasons why, for example, our governments need to have faith and just simply invest in us doing the work, because it's not going to happen on the time scale of an election or whatever your priorities might be, right? So I also want to make a comment about how we call the stuff like us, like everyday matter or normal matter. So if you look at this pie chart, quite evidently, we are not normal, right? I mean, we're women and non-binary people and trans people in physics, so we're not normal anyway in some sense, right? But really, the everyday stuff in the universe is dark matter and maybe dark energy. We still don't even really know if dark energy is the right description. And voids. Actually, space is mostly empty. So what's normal is emptiness. What's abnormal is that we came to be. Okay, so people talk a lot about dark matter. I saw a claim by a theoretical physicist whose name I won't mention that dark matter was like foreboding and scary to people. So I've never actually experienced anyone who wasn't a physicist make this claim to me about dark matter being foreboding and scary, but let me clear the air in case there's anyone in the room feeling frightened. So what is the case for dark matter? One of the reasons that I like working on dark matter, by the way, is that it was discovered by a woman, Vera Rubin, who really should have won the Nobel Prize. And I have zero basis for this comment, but I have often felt that the Nobel Committee was waiting for her to die. And they succeeded. She died in December, on Christmas Day, in fact. So the basic idea behind dark matter is that apparently we need more mass than we can see. So again, paying attention to our freshman physics class, if you think about the physics of rotation, you remember that there is a relation between how fast something is rotating and how much mass there is in it, right? So you can actually, astronomy is very much like detective work of how do you map everyday physics onto stuff you see that's really, really far away. And so Vera went and looked at how fast stars were rotating in the galaxy and how much mass you would expect to be in those stars based on their rotation, and compared it to how much mass you would expect to be in those stars based on how much light they were emitting, and discovered that there was a mismatch. And so she was not the one who came up with the dark matter paradigm, but she was really the first person to come up with compelling evidence for its existence. Of course, there are two ways of looking at this piece of data. So either we are measuring the mass wrong, or we need to modify gravity because we're filtering our data through the wrong theory. And this is one of the reasons that it's actually very important to have a strong dynamic between observers and theorists, because this is a conversation that we continuously have. And modified gravity is actually quite an active research program at Perimeter. But I would say the majority of people in the community think of dark matter as the primary candidate. And really, when we say dark matter, we just mean that it's something that produces no light. And often, you will hear people say that its only interaction is via gravity. So I want to be clear that actually its only significant interaction is via gravity. We hope very, very much that it has mild interactions with other, what we keep calling everyday particles, because that's how we do dark matter detection experiments. And these are experiments that Canadian and American teams are involved in, so this is something that, as a continent, we have invested in. So in the meantime, over the years, theorists have had a few ideas about what dark matter might be. So what you're looking at is the Venn diagram to end all Venn diagrams. This is the best Venn diagram you're ever going to see in your life, and I will fight anybody who argues with me about that. And I have to say, I can't even take credit for it. I really wish I had come up with this idea. This is by Tim Tate, who's a phenomenologist at the University of California. So these are different theories of dark matter. So, an experimentalist's annoying problem of not being able to find a particular phenomenon is like every theorist's dream opportunity, because it means that they can come up with every wild model that they can think of and publish about it and go around and tell people that they're right and that observers don't have any evidence to tell them that they're wrong, so they get to just walk around telling people that they're right. I'm not that kind of theorist, but there are lots of those out there. But so here, I just want to highlight a few things. So you'll see MSSM here, which is the minimally supersymmetric model. So those words might not be familiar to you, but I'm sure many of you have heard that the Large Hadron Collider has been looking for supersymmetry. So we don't often make that connection, but supersymmetric particles are potential dark matter candidates. You'll also see theorists love the Higgs. You can make the Higgs do anything. So people try and make the Higgs be the inflaton. People at various points tried to make the Higgs be dark matter. When they realized that the Higgs couldn't be dark matter, they just modified the Higgs to the little Higgs to create a Higgs that could be the dark matter. This is basically how doing theoretical physics works. So if you fixing broken things with calculus, then theoretical physics is the job for you. You'll also see something called sterile neutrinos here. These are not the neutrinos that we've seen because neutrinos are not massive enough to be dark matter. So what do you do when the particle doesn't do what you want? You just make another one like it, right? So I have spent a lot of the last few years of my career living in this corner, in the quantum chromodynamics axion corner. And rather than tell you guys anything in detail about the axion, other than it is your favorite dark matter candidate, officially. Nobody tell me anything different until this conference is over. And even then, maybe keep it to yourself. So we have all of these models of dark matter. What do we do, right? Like, how do we tell the difference? How do we start to make these distinctions? So one of the things that over the years we've thought about is what are the different types of phenomenology? So a phenomenology that we're very well aware of in the laboratory, and I think that people here at the IQC and in surrounding laboratories think about a lot, is to ask the question, is Bose-Einstein condensates? And so one question you can ask is, what if dark matter forms Bose-Einstein condensates? Does this produce an unusual observational phenomenology that we can then go out and look for with our Hubble telescope, with the James Webb Space Telescope that's going to be launched next year? So what is a Bose-Einstein condensate? So these are atoms or subatomic particles that are cooled to a critical temperature, and that critical temperature is going to be determined by the density of the particles and also the potential that it's in. And basically what you get is an unlimited number of bosons sharing the same ground zero mode state. So they start to act like one super particle, one super atom together. And so you can imagine already that this might produce unusual observational impact that other particles will not have. So I just want to kind of give another kind of intuition for what a Bose-Einstein condensate is. So you think when things are basically room temperature, the particles are like billiard balls, and they're just bouncing off of each other. And then as you get to lower temperatures, you have to start thinking of them as a little bit quantum mechanics. So they're like little de Broglie wavelets, right? So you just have your little waves floating around. And then as you hit the critical temperature for Bose-Einstein condensate, these wavelets start to add together coherently into one single wave. So you can think of it in some sense as a coherent wave. And if you can get to absolute zero, then you can get a perfect Bose-Einstein condensate. So another way of putting this is that what we've been thinking about is quantum blobs in space. So where the axion comes in, the axion is a particle, and why it's your favorite dark matter particle. Everyone raise your hand, it's your favorite, right? Yes, okay. The axion actually solves another problem in the standard model of physics. That's an outstanding problem. It's known as the strong CP problem. I won't get into it, except I will say that it comes out of a mechanism developed by Roberto Pecci and Helen Quinn. It's one of the very few things in theoretical physics named after a woman who was actively involved in its production. So Pierre Sacchivi and a member of his group proposed in 2009 that the axion must form a Bose-Einstein condensate in the early universe. And basically, the community has been trying to figure out whether Pierre is right or not ever since. And so this is something that I've been working on for a while. And one of the questions that has come up, so when we talk about a Bose-Einstein condensate in the lab, we're thinking like lab scale, things that you can put on like an optics table that are fairly small, right? But they're talking about something that might be galaxy size. So these are tens of kiloparsecs in scale. And so you can think of a giant quantum blob might be surrounding us, a completely invisible to the human eye, giant quantum blob. So that's the kind of thing that we start to think about in the dark matter community. So I'll just mention, because it's not really a physics talk unless the physicist has plugged their own paper. One of the questions that we were very much first interested in is whether dark matter axions form a Bose-Einstein condensate, and then what the scale is. And so actually, sort of one of the big tensions in the community right now is that we think the scale is small, like asteroid size, or as my friend Anna Watts has been calling our little blobs, axteroids. And so I gave the archive number here. This was an editor selection in Physical Review D a few years ago. It's a paper I wrote with my postdoc advisor, Alan Guth, and with Mark Hertzberg, who's now at Tufts. So I just want to wrap up by making a couple of comments. It's easy to give a physics talk and make it seem like doing physics is really all about making things up with calculus, which is kind of what I said, right? But there's actually a human story behind every physicist's trajectory in everybody's lives. So these are some of the things that I've worked on, and these are the institutions that I have gone through while I was working on them. So you guys will notice that I've mentioned Perimeter Institute a bunch of times. I was a PhD student here at the University of Waterloo. And in addition to having kind of this trajectory, I wanted to give you guys some images of what I was up to and how I looked during the time that I was doing these things. So I picked a picture from every stage of my academic career. So starting with freshman Chanda. So this was me at Harvard College as a freshman in my dorm room with my very first camera that had a flash. This is me at the National Society of Black Physicists meeting after a long day of organizing sessions. When I was a graduate student at Santa Cruz. This is me just a few months after I arrived in Waterloo. And I think that this photo was taken as I was heading out with what we used to call the Glomos to a gay club. So for me, being part of the gay community at Waterloo was a really important thing. This is me at the National Society of Black Physicists in 2011. I was co-chairing the conference that year and also organizing sessions. So I was a postdoc at NASA at this point. This was taken at my housewarming party in Cambridge when my husband and I bought our home when I was a postdoc at MIT. And this is me giving a philosophy talk at the University of London just a couple of months ago. So I also now do work in philosophy. And so I just kind of wanted to throw out, there are various things that I did along the way. I didn't just do calculations. So I mentioned NSBP. I was involved in queer organizing for the American Astronomical Society. I was vice president of the Graduate Student Association here, as well as at Santa Cruz. I recently won a $100,000 grant to study intersections of knowledge production and marginalization from a philosophical perspective. And I really want to highlight, one of the things that I had to develop during this time period was an internal confidence that these were all important contributions to physics, because I certainly wasn't going to be professionally rewarded for them. I get invited to come and speak at wonderful conferences like this one, but it's also the case that behind closed doors, hiring committees are telling me, you shouldn't be doing these things, right? It's an interesting mismatch between public and private priorities in the physics community. So the last thing that I want to mention about this is that one of the things that I did along the way, I was Perimeter's first Black North American graduate. I was also possibly Waterloo Physics' first Black North American PhD. And unfortunately, Canadian institutions are terrible about tracking this important data and celebrating barrier breakers. So I, in fact, don't even know, and it was something that nobody ever discussed with me or said congratulations, or that's an important moment for North Americans. So I just really want to highlight, these are the things that we do along the way, even if people don't tell us that we are doing them. Thank you.